This guy, Yalcin Yilmaz, he was a security guard at one of these little vacation apartments, essentially. And so he would make these recordings late at night. And it's interesting because information has since come out about him. He's since made more interviews lately. And he said the reason he bought the camera was someone he thinks could possibly have been an alien basically came up to him and said, hey, you should get a nice camera and start recording. And he didn't recognize the guy or anything. So he ends up buying this camera with a deep zoom on it and captures some pretty amazing videos.
Welcome. I'm here with Chris Lehto. Chris, welcome.
Thanks, Sean. Glad to be here.
All right. Now, I don't do a whole bio of the guest and all that stuff beforehand. I kind of just let the guest put things in their own words. So unless people have been living under a rock for the last 4 years, most people who will watch this know exactly who you are. But for those who have been potentially living under a rock, just kind of a brief background. Where are you from? And let's just start with where you're from, who you are, etc.
Yeah, I'm Chris Lehto. I grew up in Houston, Texas. And then when I was right before I was 18 even, so still 17, joined the Air Force through the Air Force Academy. So I got into one of the service academies at the Air Force and majored in material science. I was always interested in science, nature of reality. And then after the academy, what's one of the benefits is you can go right to pilot training. So you're like first in line to go to pilot training. There's other ways to be a pilot in the Air Force. A lot of my friends went ROTC, or even after their college, they just signed up through OTS. So there's different ways to enter the Air Force. I went through the Air Force Academy. Very difficult training. Wasn't your normal university experience, but I learned a ton. Took, I think, 156 hours. So they really do ram a very broad engineering and science education. They say, by blood or whatever, one nickel at a time. And so made it through and then went to pilot training. And originally I wanted to be a C-130 pilot. And when I was in Navy training, I went to Pensacola to actually I cross-trained just for initial pilot training with the Navy and flew T-34s in Pensacola. And there was an old Marine simulator instructor. And he's like, why the hell would you want to be a C-130 pilot? And basically kind of talked me into, thinking about being a fighter pilot. And then it's quite difficult to get into fighter training. You have to be at the top of your class, and then you have to request to select fighters. But I grew up playing a lot of video games. I played sports as well. And so I think that did help. So I was able to make it into fighter training. And so through fighter training, I selected F-16s. And really, I liked the F-16 because it was single seat. So you're not flying with anyone else. You kind of run the whole show. And it's multi-role. So there's other planes. We were talking before we started recording. You said the A-10. A lot of people did like the A-10. It's also single seat, but it's only air to ground or primarily air to ground. They are very hard to fight air to air. Actually, I learned later on. And the F-15 has two versions, but the C model is the air-to-air only. So that's another single-seat fighter, but it's only air-to-air. So I chose the F-16 because it's multi-role. It's both. So it does many roles, actually, not does air-to-ground roles.
Which one was multi-air? You said F-16 is air-to-air.
F-16, yeah. There's also F-15E. That's a Strike Eagle. And it's multi-role, but it's two seats.
And which one was only air-to-air? That's the one I missed.
F-15C.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the Eagle. Also an amazing plane. It had the time to climb record for many years. Giant airplane with two big engines, flies very high, big wings, giant radar. A lot of the pilots of that get testicular cancer, actually, because they're right between their legs is this giant radar system. And the F-22 replaced the F-15C. They still have some around, and they upgraded the C models with new amazing radars. But the F-22 basically replaced the C models. And then the F-35 is now your new multi-role kind of infantry fighter. The F-16, it's like your infantry. There's a lot of them. They're small. They're single engine, single seat, kind of like a motorcycle. It's like a motorcycle of the fighters.
Well, it's also
And
the
there's a
hangar
lot of
queen,
them.
right? It's the hangar queen. It spends like more time in maintenance and like
I don't think so. No, that
it's got a reputation
uh,
for that. It's got a reputation for like being expensive and like spending a lot of time in maintenance.
F-16s.
No, no, no. F-35.
Ah, F-35. Yeah, I could see that. Any new, it has so much new technology in it, and it's a huge conglomerate aircraft. But I've also trained with the F-35s in my career, fought against them, and it's an amazing aircraft. Like definitely, if I had to go to combat again, that's the plane I would want to be in. You know, it's a stealth fighter or an F-22, also an amazing aircraft.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
So anyway, I became an F-16 pilot, met my wife in training, and then lived all around the world, which was the best part, I think, of being in the military. Was lived in Korea, South Korea for a year, lived in Italy for 3 years, and then I was Op 4. We talked a little bit about that before we started recording with the aggressors. So that was probably my most identifying assignment. I identify most as an aggressor, where you really study the enemy systems, you study the Russian systems, the Chinese systems. I got to go to the NSA. I got to go to Dubai to an air show and talk to like the Russians selling their missile systems at the Dubai Air Show. Got to go to Australia and do intelligence analysis. So I really enjoyed that. I also really enjoyed being a crash safety investigator. So I thought that was quite interesting, where you train to actually look into crashes and be the pilot member. I was a pilot member on an Iraqi crash. It was an Iraqi general flying in Tucson and actually got spatial disoriented, or we believe from the investigation that he was spatial disoriented from using night vision goggles. So yeah, it's a very difficult job. It's all encompassing, very taxing on your body, physically, mentally, on your family. But got to do quite a few amazing things. I also got to run a simulator contract. That was quite interesting. So I learned about contracting. That's helped with my UAP kind of investigations in Phoenix. So I was the government member overseeing the Lockheed contract for the F-16 simulators in Phoenix. So that was quite interesting. I got to learn about software, how it works. And when I was an aggressor, I was a electronic attack expert. I really enjoyed that as well, learning all about how electronic attack works, primarily jamming, radars and radar jamming systems, jammers, essentially, countermeasures, and then countermeasures, so it's basically just a continuous kind of arms race. And then finally finished did a exchange tour in Turkey. Actually, that was also very interesting. And so they sent me to defense language school in Monterey, and I got to learn Turkish over a year. It's an intensive school. The teachers are amazing. They really know how to teach you a language. It's how we train all of our logistics. So our spies, essentially, or the people that translate from our spies. I think that this will all be replaced by AI very soon. But trained to learn Turkish. And then I flew with the Turks for 2.5 years in Ankara. And that was really an enlightening experience. And I left a year and a half before the coup, but the actual Turkish coup was in the squadron that I was in. It was from that base, was the headquarters of the rebel F-16s, they called them. So I actually trained several of the guys who are still in
the
jail.
Islamists won out on that one, right? Like there was an attempted coup by basically like the Ataturk faction, right? Which is basically would have been running or keeping Turkey from becoming an Islamic regime since at least maybe the turn of the century, something like that. Or maybe it was a little bit after that. But it was after the Ottoman Empire collapsed, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I didn't know much about it before I lived there. But you're right.
And basically like they just tried, they would always reassert authority, and this time they failed. And when Erdogan basically is taking it more along the Islamic route ever since.
Yeah, I'm actually planning a trip. I'm releasing the advertising next week to go all through Turkey in September 2026. And I want to go back, so I have to kind of temper how I talk about the subject.
Understood. So let's talk about Kumburgaz, because that's probably the best UFO video there is, right? And that was taken in Turkey, right? So you said you're going to
It
go
was.
back there. When you go back there, what are you gonna?
Well, I went
Yeah.
back previously. I went to Kumburgaz, which is just right north of Istanbul. And it's not the nicest place. It's actually a tourist destination for the Turks, but it was pretty dirty and run down, difficult to get to. I brought my family there, kind of dragged them there. And then we spent 3 days and walked up and down the beach just asking people. I had my daughter basically filming for me. I paid her, some nominal working fee. And we just asked if anyone had seen anything interesting or seen any UAPs, and actually found 3 or 4 people who had seen interesting lights or remember that event, because it was all over the news in Turkey, and it went for 3 years each summer. And this guy, Yalcin Yilmaz, he was a security guard at one of these little vacation apartments, essentially. And so he would make these recordings late at night. And it's interesting because information has since come out about him. He's since made more interviews lately. And he said the reason he bought the camera was someone he thinks could possibly have been an alien basically came up to him and said, "Hey, you should get a nice camera and start recording." And he didn't recognize the guy or anything. So he ends up buying this camera with a deep zoom on it and captures some pretty amazing videos. I don't think they've been fully debunked. I know Mick West has made some videos on them saying it's a street lamp. I think the only possibility is that it could have been purposely hoaxed. I think if you look at the date, there is a date and time on the videos, and you can corroborate that with the moon phase at that time. So it seems like the date and time does match the phase of the moon that he's recording. And then he records the moon, and he then immediately pans down to the object. And so I think that's really compelling. I don't think it could be like a boat on the horizon based on the angle above the ground that the moon is at. If you know the phase of the moon, you know the time and the date, then you can assess how high the moon is above the horizon. And so I don't think it's a boat that's on the horizon. That seems like the most valid, skeptical argument, mundane explanation. And also interesting, there was like a UAP conference. And I don't want to get the year. I think it was 2008 in August, but Dr. Lear was there. And he actually watched.
He's the implant guy for folks.
Yeah, he's passed now. But yeah, he had investigated a bunch of alien implants or alleged implants for many years. And he was there actually at the conference. And so you can find interviews of him online. It's on my channel as well, of him saying that, yeah, I was there. I saw the camera and I saw him actually videotape this video of these objects. So I think that's quite compelling. I went back. I didn't see any UAPs. I was out there looking. I was only there 3 nights, but we did talk to some people. And I don't know if they didn't want to talk to me, actually. When I went to the location, it was pretty weird. Nobody wanted to talk, actually, at the little Tatolkoyu, what is that, a vacation town, at the little apartments. They scattered as soon as I showed up. So nobody
had a
there
camera.
wanted to talk. I didn't even have a camera, but I had a microphone. I actually thought it was off, but it was actually on. The light was blinking. And so I don't know. Anyway, they scattered. They did not want to talk to me. I did find one woman who said, yeah, she was there at the time. She didn't want to be recorded on camera, but she was there. She knew Yalman. She thought he was credible. She didn't see any reason why he would lie about it. She remembers him videoing this stuff. She also said that she saw lights up in the air, which, is hit or miss. I get a lot of videos on my channel, just people saying, hey, I captured an orb, and literally 9 out of 10 times it's a satellite, and then the one other time it'll be like a lens glare or something. So I've only gotten a few really, I guess, videos I considered really super interesting. And the one video that I thought was definitely high def, it was a video down in Australia. And this guy, Michael, he did not want to be released public, his name, although I did verify his identity. And Ross Coulthard actually worked with him. Ross went and interviewed the guy, checked his background, checked everything about him. Ross thought he was telling the truth. And this video is, I mean, it looks like a flying saucer up close, crazy lights. I thought it was the best video ever. And immediately the public said it's BS. It's an arc welder, it's a flashlight. So I found like even if you have a video that's of literally like a flying saucer right there, it's not going to make a difference. I think in order to have some real breakthrough, we need to have like a mass sighting where there's just hundreds, maybe thousands of people capturing it on their phones at the same time.
We did, and it still didn't. We've had multiple mass sightings. It just like 1952. We lost aircraft trying to chase this stuff down. The Farmington incident in New Mexico, like massive mass sighting, again swept under the rug. Then you had the Arizona mass sighting again. And the other thing is AI is coming along at just the right time for the government, the powers that be, because now everything can be chalked up to, oh, that's just an AI rendition. And it's just getting better and better and better. So I've come to the conclusion personally that we're never going to get disclosure, and you just have to learn for yourself and kind of get whatever corroborating evidence you can. And that's about all you can do. So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was just finishing an edit on Gary. I interviewed Gary Nolan and Diana Pasulka last week. I was really excited about it. And I'm just had a nightmare editing it. Just terrible. As I'm sure you've come across, just when it just doesn't go right, everything just breaks on your editing software and you delete files. Anyway, I think I got it to finally come out, but it was interesting. I asked them that question. What do you think about disclosure? And Diana said that from her perspective, disclosure has already happened, essentially, that the government has admitted that there is a lot of evidence. And now we're like post-disclosure. This is it. It's like you get the president you want. It's just terrible. It's just not anything that you were hoping for. But her argument was that the government has in many ways disclosed that the phenomenon is real. They said it's real. They said UAPs are real. They're investigating them. So I don't know. I hope we get more information, but I kind of agree. I was so optimistic, and I have videos in the past saying disclosure's right around the corner, clickbait titles, because I thought disclosure was right around the corner, and it just always fails,
Well, yeah, and I think they've lied, like the institutions have lied so much about so many things that nobody would believe them if they came out. Like the Blue Beam people would come out and say, "Oh, it's a psyop. It's what what's his name? I'm like forgetting names today. The SS Rocket Man, Von Braun, that Von Braun said would be the next psyop, right? So
a false flag.
Yeah, and stuff that we thought was conspiracy theory a few years back, right? It was actually real. and stuff it's not even about UFOs, right? So like the whole Russia Gate thing was an op, right? Like there was just all the, anyway, I'm not trying to get into politics, but well, I'll just balance it. And then we get this president comes in, says he's going to release the Epstein files, and then does the complete opposite, right?
Yeah.
So everybody at the well, yeah, that's you know what our government did. They did have some drones up there. As soon as these things showed up, they sent their own stuff up so they could say, "Oh, it was our own stuff," right? So they just like everything they do is a lie. So I've become look. I was a former military officer. I bought into all the bullshit, right? I was like rah rah rah, and as I've gotten older, I just really like these people got a bunch of my friends killed on behalf of a foreign nation, right?
Yeah.
On the behalf of the foreign policy of a foreign nation. And why? Because they take money from a PAC, from a foreign nation, right? And I'm deliberately not saying what that nation is. People can figure it out. And like, there's just so much corruption, and that's just not the only element of corruption. There's so many elements of corruption that, like, I just don't, I'm going to be careful what I say, but.
Well, it makes sense. If you are a foreign nation, what's the most effective use of your funds, right? Your money. Are you going to spend 3% of your entire GDP budget to try and build some system, some military system, like a fighter, for instance, that probably won't work, and you probably won't be able to
Right.
do it
You just
in the
bribe
first
U.S.
place.
politicians, and then
Yeah.
they'll
Or you can
send.
use the system
Yeah.
that's legal. I think we let it happen.
Yeah.
Citizens United said that any corporation essentially has the freedom of speech so that they can and should be able to donate to our political members. So
Except
any
we do
corporation.
have a law that requires you to disclose that you work on behalf of foreign entities, and there's one organization that is carte blanche, does not have to do that. So again, I'm not.
Yeah.
There's the rules for some and the rules for others, but like I had a bunch of friends die serving on behalf of a regime that's you know committing genocide. Now, look, I don't have a dog in that fight, right? I just don't think we should have a dog in that fight either. Like, let the two sides destroy each other. I don't want to have anything to do with it, right? I don't want like my country to have that on its. I mean, anyway, I'm trying not to make extreme comments, right? I'm trying to be balanced and fair because I think all of all of them, every single, maybe except Massey. Massey might be okay, but almost every single one of them is in the pocket of one organization or another. If it's not another country, it's moneyed interests or what have you. And then if you just look at, without attributing certain things to certain governments or interests, like we're all moving in a certain direction as a planet, right? And everything that's happening seems to be engineered toward the destruction of the nation state, right? Like our government is engaging in activities that make Americans hate it, right? So flooding the country with 20 million illegal immigrants, allowing them to vote in my state, right, where they basically don't check. And I think it was illegal for them for you to show your ID when you voted,
So is
right?
that when you went to vote? Did you vote? I guess.
Yeah, that'll be the last time I ever vote.
Did
because
they
it's
ID you
pointless.
or at all? Did they check your ID?
Well, I always vote. I always vote with
Absentee.
absentee ballot because in my state it's like free and clear, right? You can send as many ballots as you want. I'm just kidding, but apparently, when you go, I don't like going in to vote because if someone tries to get in my face, like I don't want to put myself into situations like I had one situation like that during COVID when I was out hiking in a park, and I almost did something to that person that I would have regretted for the rest of my life. Right. So but apparently you weren't allowed, if you tried to show your ID, they would not accept it. And so you hear, I'm trying not to get into politics, but Gavin Newsom's here is like, we're going to redistrict. And it's just like, go ahead. You already have 10 million people in your state that are voting that shouldn't be voting. Go ahead. It's an empty threat. We don't care. Right. So anyway, it's just, not that voting the other way is going to help anyway. People who voted the other way, where's the UFO disclosure? Where's the list? Right? Yeah. What happened to JFK? One of those files are going to be released? When the Martin Luther King files? How's that budget cutting going? Oh, big beautiful bill. We're spending more than ever. Everything this guy said he was going to do, he's done the opposite. Look, I'm sorry. I'm not a tribes person. I don't have a tribe. You either do what the fuck you say you're going to do or get the fuck out. This guy, there's some power beyond these people that are in control and they all do their bidding. That's the way it works. And they're not going to convince me otherwise. We live in a tyranny and it just is what it is. I pay my taxes. I pay the tyrants, right? 55% of my income goes as part of my slave tithe. And it just is what it is, right? I'm nonviolent. I don't recommend doing anything but at the end of the day, we live in a tyranny. And it is what it is. Anyway, I didn't mean to take it in this direction. So
save time. I moved overseas. I left the U.S. actually. So I can agree I think, but I do have a whole perspective on it. I'm finalizing the edit on a book where I argue for a systems approach. Basically, I argue that we're inside larger entities, that the nation states are actually living life forms on Earth. They're Earth life forms. That's the reason, like the reason cells in your body sacrifice themselves for you, like your white blood cells. You have cells in your digestive system that would probably not want to be there if they knew about neurons. They're born into the system, they die in the system. They're there for the system. So I think we're just part of larger entities. And yeah, they have their own wants and needs. And I don't think they know we're even here. Like,
yeah, and it's the same thing for us, right?
yeah,
But I think there's something behind the curtain, a group, people, non-humans, demonic entities. I have no idea, right? I can't claim to know. But if you just look at all the things that are going on in the world, independent, kind of remove a political lens or even a geopolitical lens, like just look at the actions and effects of what's happening. So I'll just run down a few. Infertility rates are increasing because of all sorts of pollutants in the environment. You have the rise of transhumanism, so transgenderism, all that stuff, which, without taking a view on it, what's the net impact? Fewer children, right? You have what appears to have been a bioengineered pandemic that, whether or not it was accidental or on purpose, it was a bioengineered virus that was released, right? The fact that they tried to cover it up with a bat bit a pangolin, which was eaten by some Chinese barbarian, which apparently was a less racist story than it just leaked from a lab. But whatever, okay, whatever, you float your boat. But they lied about that, and then the solution in many cases was worse than the cure. And I won't get into that because I want this video to actually continue. Then you have 22 million people flooding into the US. You also have refugees flooding into the UK. In the UK, you have the government ignore 29 Muslims raping an unconscious woman, but they're setting up undercover ops where they have an attractive young policewoman jogging in the park, and any young white British male that catcalls her is stopped and questioned by police, right? Like, which is basically, it almost seems designed to want to make the British want to overthrow their government. They're doing the same thing in Ireland. Then you have, all sorts of other laws that are are being enforced, where you have people who are debanked for saying certain things, right? Or just using the crime of using cryptocurrency, right? So there are a lot of things in motion that, if you step all the way back, seem to have a depopulation, or seem to be in concert with a depopulation agenda, as well as the smashing the nation state. So, and why would you want to do that? Well, if you want to have a spacefaring civilization, at some point you have to unite the globe, right? Oh, and that's the other thing too with food, right? This whole decarbonization agenda will have the net effect of starvation, right? Like, people need a certain amount of protein to survive, and they're not going to get it from bugs, right? And then you have digital currency. If you try to implement that on a grand scale, you can prevent people from buying steak 5 days a week, right? Oh, you've had too many steaks. That's, unhealthy, right? Your currency's not going to work today for buying steak. Just steak. Don't worry. Everything else is fine, right? So there's this pull for increased granular control at a much more abstract, or a higher level of abstraction, at like the global level. So anyway, I don't know what's driving that, but it all seems to be everything seems in concert to push the humanity in that sort of direction. Anyway, that's a long. People want to hear you talk, not me.
No, I think the same thing, but for different reasons. I think first off, there's this, and I live outside the U.S. I mean, yeah, the world does seem crazy or whatever, but it seems like it's even the perspective is worse from inside the US. I remember when I was in Turkey, I was there with a Pakistani exchange pilot. Great guy, Kambar. We couldn't use computers, actually. They wouldn't let us use their computer system. So we just had to sit in a room when we weren't flying. So we'd chat a lot. I was teaching him Turkish. He didn't get to go to a Turkish school like I did. And I remember it was actually when Trump won. Anyway, he said, yeah, now welcome to the rest of the world leadership. Basically, what he was saying is that the US had kind of had this like a free run, or it was overly perfect in the US, and now we were joining the rest of the world in what he considered like basically, like you mentioned there, that the corrupt or just overall defunct. And my own impression is that nothing has really changed actually in the world. What's really changed is that now we're aware.
Yeah, it's more visible. I agree with that. And they had more
we have
control.
more access.
They had more control in the past because you had like 3 networks with television.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, continue your thought.
I think information was just much more centralized in the past. You know, you just look back historically, just all the terrible things the CIA did, you know, for so many years to so many, not just other countries, but also Americans. You know, they had CIA operatives, Operation Mockingjay. They had operatives all across the newsstands, you know, and all of the news organizations.
They still do.
Probably still do.
They absolutely still do. There's no doubt in my mind they still do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, but now we have the benefit of decentralized information flow, which I do feel censored. Like, I'd be very surprised if I wasn't censored on YouTube. Actually, I can see my numbers as soon as I started vocally calling out all the leaders in the US, so leaders of these intelligence agencies. As soon as I started calling them out a lot by name, I saw an immediate drop in all of my numbers. And it's funny too, because you'll see guys like YouTubers, they say like Diary of a CEO. He'll be like, you know, he does this little advertisement for his channel and he says, you know, it turns out only 15% of you are subscribed actually to my channel. The other 85% are not subscribed. So you need to subscribe. And I was like, dude, my numbers are completely reversed. Like literally 85% of my views come from subscribers. And what does that mean is that YouTube is not sharing my video at all, right? 85% of his views come from non-subscribers. So that means YouTube is like spreading his, and you could say it's the algorithm. It's, you know, maybe his videos are much better. I'm sure they are.
Does YouTube actively unsubscribe your subscribers?
Yeah, definitely as well.
They do that to me too. Like, I've tested it on every live stream now. I have to say, if you're enjoying this content, please subscribe. Also, if you have subscribed and are enjoying this content, please double check to see that you know you're still subscribed. And so far, I mean, four times. Again, I'm trying to be unbiased about it, but 4 times people are like, "Oh my God, I'm not subscribed anymore." Like, yeah, there's definitely something going on in the back. Like, I've seen, even on a more granular level, where you have a YouTube channel, so you're well aware of the engagement graph. Have you ever seen an engagement graph? Because they usually, you know, they kind of come down, they slope down, like downward. It's either, if it's a terrible show, it goes down fast. If it's decent, it's much slower. But have you ever seen it goes down, and let's say you're at 30%, and then it spikes to 98%, and then back down, and then it keeps going? Have you ever seen that?
No.
So I've seen that before, and I had a precognitive dreamer who worked for MI5 and MI6 for 30 years. He testified on a affidavit that the Lockerbie bombing was going to happen before it happened. Like, he put in writing to Scotland Yard, and they're like, "I don't think you should do that." And they're like, "No, I think we should." So when I was interviewing him, he said something, and I missed it during the interview. And the only reason I saw it is because somebody actively monitors, probably NSA. It's probably streaming through some system, and there are certain keywords that will trigger it. So he admitted on my show that back in the 70s, the British could vote on anyone's behalf at any time.
Wow.
But he just said it. He just said, like, there's a bunch of things they do. They do this. They can vote on somebody else's behalf. They can vote on somebody else's behalf. It spiked up and spiked back down and then continued.
Wow.
So there is almost definitely active monitoring of this system. And like there are certain shows you're like, how does this person have 100,000 followers? Right. Well, because they tell the line. They tell the story. They tell the narrative. And that's not in all cases, but it's pretty obvious when there's an AstroTurf operation and when there's not. So anyway, I didn't mean, again, I should be talking way less, but from like what you're saying, I'm constantly up against this stuff. It feels like I've been shadow banned for a very, very long time. And look, maybe my show just sucks. Maybe it's not good, and that's a possibility. But a lot of the stuff that I'm saying, people don't want someone with my background saying, right? So I had a question for you in the very beginning, but I didn't want to interrupt. But it's related to that. So you had an appointment to the Air Force Academy. To get an appointment, you had to get like a politician, right? From probably Texas at the time.
Yeah, it was the Congressman Bill Archer in Houston.
So I was the primary nominee for my state too. I didn't go to the Air Force Academy. I went somewhere like I was trying to get an appointment to West Point because I don't have 20/20 vision, right? I didn't have 20/20 vision then. But I had applied for an appointment to West Point. So my senator made me the primary nominee for the Air Force Academy, right? Even though I wasn't, because of like my math and science background, basically. Guess who that guy was?
I don't know.
Senator Biden.
Senator Biden. Interesting.
Yeah, a long time ago. But anyway, the background I have, they don't want people like me saying the things that I say. It can be, again, I'm just speculating. It could just be that this channel just sucks, right? That's always a possibility. But the rate at which I'm growing does not make sense. I should be a much bigger channel, but maybe not. Maybe I'm just not that good, right?
No, I saw a definite drop. It was like in the incline was going very, very high subscribers. And as soon as I came out against the military industrial complex, essentially, it just like leveled. And that you could say maybe it's just the way I did it, or I don't know, man. It seems super sketchy. And like you said, you can always just rely on, there can always be people, commenters say, oh, it's just your content, it's your content.
Yeah.
But no.
And it might be, right? Like you have to be open to criticism and feedback and doing better and all that good stuff. But the background I have, I'll give you an example. So I did my master's thesis on the Iran nuclear problem, right? Like how do you prevent them from getting a nuke? My thesis advisor 8 years later became Obama's Secretary of Defense. So like I'm not like some ignorant Yahoo who's just coming into this stuff. I'm interviewing serious people about serious things that people don't think are serious, right? Like remote viewing is real. Like I've talked to many of the people who've been part of the original Stargate program. I've vetted them from, having been in the military, particularly through David Morehouse was the first, right? And he had more of a combat arms background like I did. And he went to like similar schools and knew all the lingo. Was not fake. Like this stuff is real. So you can't have somebody like me saying this stuff because it adds some credibility to it. I'm not just some wackadoodle, from Sheboygan. Nothing wrong with Sheboygan, Wisconsin, but I'm just picking a random place. First thing came into my head. That's just speculating on this stuff, right? I'm sure I've interviewed people who were frauds, maybe, right? But I deliberately don't take a stand. I just put the information out there and let the audience make a decision, right? Like take Lou Elizondo. Like also, these former intelligence people will not come on my show, right? They just ignore me. Travis Taylor won't come on or doesn't respond. And I've interviewed him in separate contexts because we have the same publisher. So I interviewed him for my publisher about a book that he had coming out. But he won't talk to me. Lou Elizondo won't respond. Who else? I'm just like John Ramirez. He only talks to, if you notice, the people he talks to are always people who operate non-US podcasts. So, which, as you know, the CIA is in only like certain circumstances is supposed to be able to operate in the United States, but they can operate overseas all they want. So they're like things like that. Like a lot of those folks will not talk to me. So I don't know why. Maybe I'm just too small of a channel. Who knows?
Yeah, John Ramirez came on my show 2 years ago, but then since then he hasn't come on.
But you're in Portugal, right? So there might be like there might be some sort of
Out of the
country. I don't know. Maybe it's just he just happens to say yes to people who run foreign podcasts on foreign soil.
Yeah,
maybe I don't know, but maybe I'm seeing something that to a hammer, like every problem looks like a nail, right? So you always have to acknowledge that sort of personal bias that one you might have about your own podcast, but it definitely seems like a lot of these folks will not talk to me for whatever reason.
You were saying earlier, it feels like everything is merging towards a planetary sort of unification of some type. Basically there's some sort
which by the way has to happen if you want to have a spacefaring civilization. Like I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with the current criminal cabal that's behind all this running things. I think the way it ought to happen is that people have enough personal sovereignty to be peaceful, not cause internal problems, kind of like a bottoms up sort of progression toward that where people are more enlightened, etc. Whereas their method is more of a top down, tighten the vise of control through a currency system where they can monitor every transaction you have and prevent you from access to certain resources, regardless of whether or not you have the capability to purchase them.
Yeah, and that's what my perspective on that is. I think it is non-human intelligence. And I said before, I think what the next paradigm shift among others will be the one I'm pushing for is that there is macroscopic life. Basically we found out about viruses in the 1680s, right? This random, It was like a Dutch seamstress. That's what he did. But in his side time, he ground down like these little tiny lenses. And so he proved in 1683, you could see the animalcules, he called them, in pond water. It was Antoine van Leeuwenhoek, the Dutch guy. That was in 1683, right? But doctors didn't wash their hands until the 1880s. So it was literally 200 years later. And this guy, Semmelweis, he was like in the 1840s. He was like, hey, you need to wash your hands because the same doctors, they were doing autopsies. And then without washing their hands, they were going and delivering babies. And so they were just killing women left and right. And he actually went crazy. They put him in a mental hospital.
Yeah,
he was
I heard about that. And he was right.
He was totally right.
Well, do you know who Itzhak Bentov was?
No.
So he wrote this book called Stalking the Wild Pendulum, which is kind of a model of how reality works, where everything has kind of a units of consciousness from rocks and they're just different levels of consciousness. And as you kind of progress up the curve, and you get kind of higher frequency just means like more granularity of reality, right? As you keep going up higher. And in an interview, someone asked him, he said there's a spectrum of humanity, like a normal curve, and kind of the average person is right in the middle. But there are, people in the population who are on the far right side of the bell curve, who that's kind of where humanity is going. And somebody asked him, well, where can we find those people? And you know what his answer was?
Mental institutions.
Well, just think about people who have schizophrenia, right? They don't really. I got to be careful about this because I've lost only one video out of like 700, and that's because people started talking about remedies to that 2020 thing that hit us, right? And even out into like 2023, 24, they were still putting down videos if you just mentioned certain scripts, right, to whatever. But schizophrenia, in a clinical setting, they can't cure it. All they can do is dull your senses. But I had someone, his name's Jerry Marzinski, I interviewed him for 40 years. He started out in mental institutions, but then he went to prisons. And in prisons, they don't really care about mental health. So he was able to run ethical experiments where he would just ask prisoners, why don't you try this? Why don't you try saying the Lord's Prayer or whatever? Or why don't you try, and then he would also take elements from, mental health that psychiatrists would recommend. Like, why don't you, like non drug sort of things. Like, why don't you engage in self-talk in a certain way that's very positive or affirming? And what he kind of discovered, or his theory was that there was some kind of life form, like a parasitic entity, that because what happens with schizophrenia is you hear voices, sometimes you see they have hallucinations, but they tend to be persistently negative, and they tend to kind of push you into a fear and anxiety state. And what he believed is that these things are parasitic entities. They basically feed on your fear, feed on this negative energy that you produce. And he would have them try certain things. And when those things were effective, he would get like visits by shadow people in his room at night that would threaten him. Like, just like weird. Like, one time he was talking to a patient, and the patient said something to the effect is, they want to talk to you. And he's like, okay, go ahead. And the guy's kind of demeanor completely changed and basically said, you have no right to attack our way of life. It's like some weird. Anyway, the bottom line is maybe schizophrenics are more advanced than most people because they have a wider filter on reality than the rest of us do. Like, everybody else is much tighter filter. But anyway, I don't know how we got into that. You were talking about your macro, like Earth, like Gaia, like that concept.
Exactly.
Or like cellular organisms on Gaia.
Yeah, I call it the fractal universe. That's the name of the book. It just takes forever to finalize. It's just so painful going through like the final edits and everything.
Are you going through like a traditional publisher or?
No, I'll just do self-published. I've self-published a few books in the past. I'll just publish it that way, get it out there. Yeah, I think that is amazing because the part 3 of the book actually does talk about what you said there about consciousness or levels of consciousness. I think of it like Jacques Vallée. That was my first kind of, when I fell into the subject.
A control system.
Exactly. Yep. Is the control system. And if you look, that's how life operates, right? Is basically homeostasis, how your body maintains its metabolism, how it fights off intruders, everything. You have control systems. When your insulin levels get too high, you're going to have a control system that brings them back down. Or actually, when your glucose gets too high, insulin will be a counteractive. So a control system that stops the glucose levels from going so high that the whole system falls. Right. So you're going to have a counter system, and there's no one that's directing your insulin to do that. Right. It's your trillions of cells who have evolved to get to this state that when that happens, when glucose gets too high, it will enact this control system, right? That to save what to save the whole system, to save you as the entity. And so that's what I argue a lot of these things that we've talked about. And I think it does scale to the phenomenon is that this hidden hand that you're talking about, that, you know, that's pushing this and keeping disclosure down and censoring people like me and you who speak out from credible backgrounds, right? I think because we both were military officers. And so when we come out and say, this is bullshit, you know, maybe it carries more weight. But what it is the control systems are the same thing, right? Maybe no one person is actually directing it on purpose, but the system itself will come and censor. You know what I'm saying? That's the control system.
Yeah.
Like, so
Are you
complicated.
familiar with the book Generations?
No.
It's about the four turnings. So
Four turnings. I don't know what that is.
so we're in the fourth turning, which is the kind of the unraveling, not the unraveling. It's like the crisis stage. So these, actually, I have it right here. Let me just pull it up. So it's by William Strauss and Neil Howe. And what they did is they just looked at, through history, American history as an example, and they broke down events into four distinct generations, like every 20 years. 20 years is a generation. 80 years is what they called a seculum. And there's four stages, like each generation has a stage. And we're in the fourth stage, which is the crisis. That's when there's an unraveling and then a new world order. Like the old order is destroyed, it's smashed, and then a new world order emerges out of it. But the seculums are 80-year cycles. So what was 80 years before 2025? I'll just, to speed this up, was 1945. Okay? World War II. What was 80 years before that? 1865, Civil War. Right? I think 20 years before that was roughly, that would be what, 1785? So I'm trying to remember exactly when. That's roughly around the Revolutionary War, something like that.
Yeah, 1776, and then
it's a little bit after.
20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're in the middle of that crisis. We're in the middle of the unraveling. So, and each generation has its kind of role. So are you Gen X? A little bit after Gen X.
78. I don't know what it is.
I think that's Gen X.
Yeah.
So we're a much smaller segment, but we're the people who are going to be in power as this thing. We're going to be like and our entire lives have been disruption, right? So like my first lesson about stocks was the 2001 bubble, right? Like I learned not to invest in individual stocks unless it's your full-time day job. And it served me well ever since then. I was able to buy a house in 2009 because I had lived through that event, right? So I got it really cheap and did really well, right? Because of all those lessons. So we've been through, like our entire lives have been like just setback after setback after setback to prepare us for this, right? To lead through this time of intense uncertainty. So anyway, it just goes to your point that there are cycles, and in homeostasis, there are cycles, right? And it just so happens that every 80 years, the human population gets cold, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I look at it even, again, I apply the same lens, is that you have lifespans, just like humans have lifespans of roughly, 80 years are related to scale. So if you scale up to the size of a nation, you can look back and nations have easily observable lifespans. When you can look when they're born, they're very adaptable. They grow very quickly. They reach like midlife, where they're kind of stable. Everything's working really well. And then you get to the end of the lifespan and what happens is you have corruption, which is just like in your body, corruption, things don't work, right? What is that? Basically, the normal systems aren't working. So you have these like shortcuts, right? That's really what I consider corruption is the shortcuts. You have bureaucratic inefficiencies. And so I just think you're seeing the end of the lifespan. America is just aging. It's old, But as we look at lifespans of nations like the US, the reason I think you have lifespans in the first place, right? Like if you read back, why does life have to start and die, right? Like, I think that's a very good question that biologists still can't really answer. And my argument would be because the only thing that really is constant is change in the environment, right? So when America was formed was just a very different environment than the environment now in the planet. And so all the systems that grew up out of the Constitution and the bureaucracy that started, like it was built on slavery, right? Literally, the country was built on slavery. Now it's a very different world, right? The environment is very different. But since America grew up in that time, it can't adapt. It's just humans are the same way, right? Like old people always complain about the young people. Like it was always easy, it was harder in their day. They worked harder. They don't understand the new systems. They don't understand the newfound ridiculousness. And I think the same is for nations. They just can't adapt. You mentioned digital currencies, and I'm hugely supportive of digital currencies. And that's the one thing kind of Trump has delivered on, is he has protected, I think, the digital currencies with actual real laws.
But ask yourself why, because it serves the interests of those behind the curtain, right? In theory, it's supposed to unlock even greater freedom. But they'll just implement it in a way where they can just see every digital transaction that you engage in. And it will lead to more control. And I think it's inevitable. I don't think it's something that should be resisted. I think it should be something that people push back against so that it's implemented in a way that unlocks humanity as opposed to, enthralls them, right? Enslaves them, because it has the potential to do either.
Yeah, I mean, for the future, just to go back to kind of the argument I started was, we didn't understand the nature of reality, right? If you go back to the 1680s, the thousands of years before that, we did not have any clue that there was tiny little organisms, right? At scales that we couldn't imagine. We couldn't imagine that we were made up of trillions. We can't even count, actually, how many trillions of cells you're made up of. Right? We just couldn't imagine that at the time. And even when we knew that this world existed, we still attributed all of these things that we didn't understand we made up things, right? It was like miasmas. Why did people get sick? It's because they didn't, evil spirits entered their body. That's why you say, God bless you when someone sneezes. Infection, or you did something wrong. So we didn't understand that world, and we attributed things to it, right? Random effects that we didn't understand. So what I'm arguing now is a lot of these UAP effects, like these crazy encounters, the consciousness, there always seems to be some sort of consciousness element to it. You mentioned remote viewing as being real, all this evidence for it. Everyone that has an abduction experience or some sort of alien experience, I literally haven't heard of one where it's not telepathic communication. Right. They say it's realer than real. There's no sound of these objects. There's these crazy things that we can't understand. And I think because we don't understand the nature of reality correctly, we don't understand what consciousness even is. We don't understand what life actually is, right? We can't define our physics as a joke, actually. We can't describe inertia at all with any sort of appreciable, fidelity. Like they literally don't know what inertia is. If you don't know what inertia is, then you don't know anything about physics. I'm sorry. Like you can describe all these things all you want. You can go on all these YouTube channels and you can go on TV and wax poetic about black holes and ridiculous shit far away that, most likely does not exist, right? That most likely is all bullshit, actually. Again, they don't even know what inertia is. So
yeah, now they're claiming we're inside a black hole.
Yeah, The whole
Of
thing's
course we
ridiculous.
are. Of course we are. Right? Like,
Of course.
of course we are. Right? You've ever heard of a white hole and a black hole? It's like a high gravity portal to another universe, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I think we just know very little. And so what I see is UAPs and a lot of these encounters and effects that we're seeing is actually from, I argue, the macroscopic world. So basically, you talked about systems. When you say they want this, right? Or they will just keep humanity down. I think it is actually it's a non-human intelligence, which is a macroscopic life. So which would be a nation state or the corporate cabal. There's some sort of control system on Earth, probably outside of Earth. So I think it still scales above Earth. And that's why I think we're not going to get disclosure until the Earth system is actually ready to, like you said, become a spacefaring nation. And I think it has to do with actually the reproduction of the Earth system, where it's not ready. Like a seed is not going to sprout until the environment is correct, right? Until all this little signals are correct. There's enough water in the system. There's enough sunlight. It's the right season. So I think actually we're literally being held in the dark through these control systems, which I think relate to the sort of macroscopic progression. Basically, we don't understand what life really is. We don't even see that we're part of larger entities, which I think is just blatantly obvious. Nations are alive. We talk about them all the time, like they're alive. So yeah, that's my whole view on this whole thing.
All right, well, let's take a break here because I think that's a good natural stopping point. We can continue this discussion and also talk a little bit about the nature of the phenomenon, disclosure, and all the above in the next episode. So I didn't expect to end talk about all the topics we talked about. Hopefully I didn't talk too much, but I thought it was a fascinating interchange. So Chris, it was an absolute pleasure.
Oh, great. It was great, Sean. Thanks.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's 2 options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site, and there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much and keep watching. I really appreciate it.